Well, hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Earl Beede, a senior fellow here at Construx, and I'm happy to share with you some insights, 7 specific insights we're seeing about working from home based upon the forced quarantine of all of us. How is that impacting software world and our software development? So we're going to take a good look at that, but I'm going to do it in a slightly lighthearted manner. We've actually done a lot of talking with people. We've talked to lots of clients of ours about how their work from home is going, from both very large companies and very small companies. We've also been paying attention to what the industry is saying, but we also had our own survey go out, and we're still crunching the numbers from that. And I wanted to share with you some of the insights that seem to be percolating up, but do it in a slightly fun way. And so hopefully we can take a look at these and you can see some of your own things in there as well as some of our own. This, of course, is part of our Construx Lunch and Learn process, or Lunch and Learn offerings. We started this sort of in a way back in 2009 with our SPEAR program. It was the Great Recession, and in that recession, a lot of people out of work. We wanted to give them a chance to up their skill sets so they could be more marketable. We offered free training from them. So here in 2020, in the middle of our quarantine, in the middle of our pandemic, we wanted to see people that said, hey, is there still something out there we can up our skills because all the travel stopped and all the training stopped. And so we wanted to help create a community where people like you can get together and actually see that there's other people out there and there's stuff going on and can hear your own stories. So we're going to keep doing this in April. And next month, we're going to be modifying. We're going to try out some more things that can help you go forward. Yeah, we'll still do some of these lunch and learns probably, but we'll do some more Q&A sessions about particular topics that we already have out there in our on-demand environment and others. So stay tuned. We'll have something interesting coming in May as well. So it's still a good opportunity to share this with your friends because there's still much more of this coming down the pike. So I'm glad you could join us. A little bit about the tech before we get into our 7 insights. This is one where we're using a Microsoft Teams live events, which means I'm slightly ahead of you, but it gives you a couple cool things. One, you can submit questions in Q&A like you can on most of these tools. But for the Q&A today, I also encourage you to share some of your work from home stories. Give us some insight to how it's actually happening in your world. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Is it helpful? Is it unhelpful? Be interesting to hear that from you as well. So use the Q&A button to let us know about that. Form your sort of statement questions, if you will. The other thing this technology gives us is the ability to pause and rewind the presentation. You have control over that. Underneath this, you can pause it, go off and do something else, and play it back. Or you can go back and hear something a second time. If it looks like I'm frozen, it could be that you paused it. If you're using the web to view this, the spacebar does a really good job at pausing the presentation. So watch out for that technology. But you can rewind it, and of course, we'll have this available online later on. So Lunch and Learn Tech, submit your questions and even your comments about how the work from home is going for you as we go forward. So what are these 7 insights? Well, you can see I've named them kind of fun here. 7 different areas, and I think they'll help us understand really what's going on, and then we'll digest it all at the end. But we're going to start off with this is only a test, and then we'll get down to you are who you are, and we'll explain how that is coming from all our contacts, our survey data, and our interaction with people out in the real world, including our own work about how work from home is going. So the first insight here, is this is only a test, and this is kind of interesting because one of the things that people have been wanting to do is that this idea of working from home has been in our tech world for a long time. A lot of the business community is like, but the tech world are like, heck yeah, we've had to bring people on board who were remote. We've had to have remote development from the product owners. We've had this all the time. But what is the chat out there saying? What is really going on? Well, the chat bar says there wasn't a lot of expectation for this. A lot of people thought working from home was going to fail badly, especially when we've never really done this before. For a lot of tech people, we knew it could work, but for a lot of the rest of business, they thought this was going to fail. And so the expectation bar was really, really low. People would go out saying, we're going to have a really, really hard time. Well, it turns out it didn't turn out that bad. It's actually turning out pretty good. And so they're relatively happy with that. And for the rest of us, we're just like, hey, yeah, this can work. But remember, this is just a test. And that's what we're hearing. It's like, yeah, we want work from home to work. We want this to be a really good test, but is this really the right test? I mean, because it's not like we're working from home. We have to still work where there's children. We have to still work where there's our dog bothering us. I just heard a story this morning where someone was meeting with the board, and their wife came in and said, "Can you hold the child?" And the guy goes, I'm meeting with the board. And he goes, she said, "I didn't ask what you were doing. I asked if you could hold the child," right? She had to do something. Someone had to hold the baby. So he held the baby for 5 minutes, went on with his board meeting, put it back, right? We're not really doing the pure work from home. We're actually sort of stuck at home, right? So let's scroll up and see what else the chat bots are saying here. And because really what we're thinking about, this is really forced at home rather than set up at home. And that's what we're hearing over and over again. That this idea is that this particular one is like, wow, we didn't have a chance to sort of migrate and set ourselves up really well. We were just forced to be at home. And we're seeing that this is really making a good test for a lot of people, because this is probably the worst way we could have transferred to a work at home world, right? We didn't have the right gear, the right setup, the right lighting, the right cameras, all this stuff, and we're all faking it. But at the same time, that gave us a grace, it seems. It gave us the ability to actually work together and say, wow, yeah, Earl, you're a family room because you don't have an office yet, right? I guess that works. And we don't have the virtual backgrounds and all that kind of stuff yet. However, a lot of people still think that this is just a test still. This is only a test because we're going to go back to the office. Yes, work from home is going to be a big deal in the future, but we'll probably go back to the office. But we're going to see that's going to be a moderated kind of back to the office, because we're hearing very clearly from our leaders, well, a lot of them at least, that going back is going to have to still be a gradual go back. How do you stay 6 feet apart at a whiteboard when you're both trying to work at it, right? That's the kind of thing we have to worry about a little bit. So they still think that there's going to be more work from home in the future, but maybe not everyone, right? But we'll see how long this goes. So that's the first insight here. This is only a test, and there's going to be a go back to the office here, but how much, who, still kind of an open question. The second insight is people need people, except for developers. Yeah, because introverts like me, the stay-at-home thing has been pretty darn great, right? So what are we hearing in chat about that? What's going on with this one? Well, one of the things we're seeing is that the idea of a casual conversation is suffering. And actually, that's not a horrible thing as it sounds right off the bat, but that sense of, hey, can I just go out and have a quick conversation with you, have a nice little chat with you, that seems to be really suffering. People are missing that. And we haven't really figured out how to do that yet, right? Because ringing someone up in a video call seems a bit more formal than just meandering by their desk. That said, there was a lot of people said, I'm really glad people aren't meandering by my desk anymore, right? Maybe the introverts like me going, yeah, I get to sit down and get to work. But this idea of human connection, we've got to find someone to solve that, because the work from home is not allowing that to work nearly as well as we like. And this idea of seeing people, that just being around a community of people, you know, even introverts like me like to be sort of in amongst around people rather than all by ourselves. And so, well, for me at home here, it's not too bad. I've got a couple of daughters and a wife also working from home, so I'm not quite alone, and I get people. But for a lot of, especially our younger up-and-coming developers who are going back to empty apartments and working from there, that's a little bit harder. So this idea of seeing people is something we're hearing over and over again. It's like, how do we still have a sense of community, and how do we work that? And what we're seeing a lot of organizations do is actually focus attention on that. They're spending more time saying, hey, we got to schedule time and create opportunities for people just to be around other people without being in work. And you have to create them, because again, the awkwardness of going over that seems to be stopping a lot of people. And video, it's okay. What we're still hearing is that video is very helpful in this. In fact, I can't imagine doing this with the technology we had 7, 8, 10 years ago with that video level quality. This, at least we're getting something that's reasonable, but it's still not the same as being in person. And so as we go back to work from this work from home quarantine, and we start saying, where's that new mix of work from home and people, it's not going to be one or the other. Because while video is still very helpful, it's not the same as actually being in them in person. But do we have to be in person all the time? Thought leaders are right now saying, no, we don't have to be there all the time, but we need to be there some of the time. And so video is nice, but it's not quite the same. Let's scroll this up and see what else the chat bots are saying. And here's where I say accept developers, because we're hearing clearly from really good techies that they love not being interrupted. I mean, they just sort of put their email in quiet mode. They stop looking at the Slack chat a little bit, and they get down and they get to what they want to be doing, which is really, really helpful to them. This is, in a sense, we'll see this later on, this idea of thinking time has reemerged here, though, which is really, really good. And unfortunately, though, what we're seeing that our introverts are hiding even more. That is that those people have tended to be introverts, and this is very, if we're just doing a broad brush here, seems to be a lot of our developers. Those people are really trying to say, gosh, just leave me alone. And they're sort of fading in the background a little bit. You got to yank them back forward. And that's what we're seeing here is out of a lot of our leaders who are used to be able just to walk around and see people are having to go to yank people in because these introverts are not coming to them as nearly as much. They're just like, hey, I'm finally getting not interrupted. I'm having a good time here. And so if you sort of wrap this up, people need people except developers. If you just sort of on broad brush here, the insight seems to be from our chat bot here, our insight bot, is that if you're older, my age or maybe older, as you're a very social person, you're kind of a leader person, not with a hard deliverable, but actually have to work by interacting with other people, then working from home is okay-ish, right? It's some are kind of ugh, some are just, it's okay. No one's like, woohoo, right? Those are the people that had really low expectations from the test section, and they're just like pleasantly surprised that it's not horrid, right? But our younger people, our introverts, our developer types are like, yes, finally, I get to do the things I've always wanted to do without having to be stuck somewhere like one of those large bullpens. So we still need to figure out a way to get this human interaction, especially for our older people, our most social people, the people who have to work with the meetings. Even our developers need to have those interactions to a little degree. But and the work from home has to be intentionally done here, and that's probably the big thing. We have to intentionally do it rather than just let it organically happen as much. My third insight is we want stickies. Now this is a kind of fun term for we want stickies. So what is our chatbot really saying about we want stickies? Well, the first insight here is that as a class of tools, digital whiteboards are horrid. I put not very good, and that was a positive spin. For the most part, I mean, if you look at the ones that come built into tools like Teams and Slack and Zoom and GoToMeeting and WebEx, they are horrid. They are awful. I mean, yeah, you can write on them horribly. There's not a good way to write on them at all. The idea of a sticky note is foreign to almost all of them except for Jamboard, and then the sticky notes have really big notes you can hardly write anything on, and you can't manipulate them very well. And so our classic digital whiteboards are not very good. Now, there are some high-end whiteboards. I mean, you can get that Microsoft Surface big screen thing, but we're not going to have that in everyone's home, right? That's just $20,000 per house is probably a little expensive. There are some sort of emerging ones, Mural, Miro, a couple others that I've heard of that okay-ish, right? I mean, they do a little bit better job, but they're still not great. And so our digital whiteboards are really failing us at this point. And this is going to hopefully an area that we're going to see a lot of quick innovation on, because people love their whiteboards. They want their stickies. They want to go up and have those conversations where they're all working together and they're not stepping on each other's toes. And a lot of our agile development practices want that still too, right? If you try to do this in a big room planning, it's really, really hard right now. People are having a very hard time. And that means in general, our overall ad hoc collaborative work is really, really hard to do. And this is really seeing itself at the leadership level. Now, our developers who've got a coding task, they're like, I'm good, let's happen, right? And even pair programming, we're seeing this working like, well, we'll open up a Zoom meeting. You share your code, and I'm sitting there talking to you as you're writing code, and I'm watching you write code, right? That actually works a little bit better than two people shoved next to each other at a desktop. But what we're seeing is this, can we do some ad hoc collaboration? Can we get together and try to solve a problem? And we're even seeing the communication a little bit more stuffed, because often in those ad hocs, we would have not just one conversation, but sort of 3 or 4 going at the same time. And it's really hard to do that with our current tool set. Yeah, we're still learning some practices there. And we heard some people saying, well, we'll do both chat and a speaker. We use to raise hands to have the conversation flowing, but we're still seeing that struggling a bit here. And that generally finishes with the free-flowing conversations, that idea that how do we have a free-flowing conversation? Now, for some of my people that I'm hearing from, they said they like the fact that the free-flowing conversation is kind of stifled, that people are actually taking turns. We have to listen to one another before we speak. Whew, how radical is that? Right? But that when we're trying to get this collaboration, this free flowing, this dynamicness going on, it's really, really hard. One of the things I personally have noticed in this, and the fact that this free flowing conversation, is that all speech is almost equal. That with a decent microphone and a decent video, you're just as loud as everyone else for the most part. And you can't have that little side conversation or make a Stein mark because you're just as loud as everyone else. Everyone else is hearing you at the same level. And so you got to actually take turns. Now, I not think this is necessarily a bad thing, but it is different than what we're used to with our ad hoc collaboration. My fourth insight is old tech is my tech. And what does this actually insight really talk about? It basically means that people are used to the technology and the tools that they're used to. It's not just the tools, but also the techniques. Right? Tech also stands for technique here. I want to do things the same way I used to do them in person, but now I want to do them over the web and over things like Teams or Zoom. And what we see here is this is a classic pattern in overall human evolution, is we always try to use a new technology in an old technology way. I was studying some communication in my collegiate days, and they tell you very clearly that when motion picture came first on, it was trying just to mimic stage plays. And when radio came on, it was also trying to mimic stage plays. It's trying to say, we have this, let's try it here. TV tried to be early radio, and before they figured out what TV was really good at, right? And so every time we come up with a new medium, TV, radio, print, on forward, we keep trying to use it in an old medium way until we start learning the strengths of the new medium and start developing new practices. Yes, we'll still use it in some of the old ways, but we'll develop new ways which it's better suited for. And so one of the tricks here is like, we don't know the new ways yet for our new mediums. We're still learning them. We're trying to use them like a whiteboard, right? We all want our whiteboard back. So how do we create a whiteboard in our new medium? Well, is there a new way that we can use the technology that isn't a whiteboard, but actually accomplishes the goal as well or even better than a whiteboard used to? We're still trying to invent and turn on that. The other thing that's really missing from the old tech is that the available and busy signals are missing. This is the classic where you'd walk down the hall and you notice that someone is like had headphones on and they were heads down, and that was a clue to you that they were busy, right? And or if they were sitting back and they were in the cafeteria area or the snack bar area and they were sipping a cola, that meant they were available. Those were just natural signals that let us know when someone's available and busy. But now that we've gone to this work from home world, that tech is failing, and that old tech is not the right tech anymore. And our current tech, in Teams or in Slack or in WebEx and other instant messaging, they got those little green, red bubbles. No one's actually using those very well. You have no clue what they really mean. No one's setting them up. No one's exercising them. They're not leaving status messages. I mean, our pure work from home companies, those ones that have been doing work from home for everybody, they're actually using that really well. But for the majority of this test, that's not working. So we're missing those available and busy signals quite a bit. And we're also seeing a lot of problem with intellectual property right now from the work from home world. A lot of people are struggling like, how do I protect my intellectual property, my trade secret, my code? With everyone working from home, it's hard to say who's just bringing in the floppy drive. Not that it's ever stopped a dev person before, but we see it's far more on the business side. And what are we printing? And who's seeing that printing? And where is that print going? How do we shred things? So the intellectual property one here is really a challenge from this work from home. And I actually challenged some CIOs this morning in a call on another medium, and then they're like, oh, wow, we're gonna have to figure that out. Well, yeah, we're gonna have to figure that out. And so we'll see how they're kind of deal with it a little bit here. Oh, we have some more on this old tech is my tech. One of the things that we're seeing though is kind of interesting is that we're becoming more reliant on the infrastructure in place. So what's that insight tell us here? Well, it's different from different parts of the world. Here, where I am in North America, in the Seattle metropolitan area, I have very reliable electricity. I have very reliable internet. I have very reliable food supply. I have plenty of room in my home, so I can even have a large room just to myself for the most part. And so my infrastructure in place is not too bad, but we don't see that consistency around the world. And different parts of the world, even parts of California right now might have say, wow, wait till the next dry season comes along and PG&E has to start cutting power on a regular basis. How's that going to affect the work from home world? We don't have that standard generator that allows to going. And I know that from my work in India, that if you're going to have a high-tech center, you're going to have the generators and stuff to give you that consistency that you need to be able to run this kind of medium. So a lot of organizations are starting to really start to grapple with this, work from home. If it's going to keep going, and it looks like at some degree it has to keep going, we'll see a little bit more of that in a second, but if it's going to keep going, how do we make sure that we can deal with this maybe inconsistency on things that we really rely on? Again, the other thing that's really interesting is we see this over and on, and this is something that actually surprised me quite a bit, is that the main tools right now aren't things like Teams and Zoom, though those are growing and the most common ad going on. The main tool is VPN and remote desktop, right? Because it seems like the work from home means for a lot of people, and you know, as a devy kind of techie, I thought, wow, this is really weird. But for a lot of people, they're VPNing and just running the machines on their desktop. That's how they're trying to deal with that intellectual property problem. That they're not getting the property, it's running their desktop, and so you can't put a floppy drive in your local things because it's actually a remote desktop. Though, you know, some remote desktop systems will let you do that depending on how they've been locked down by the IT department. And so this has actually overwhelmed most people's firewalls. Their firewalls have a CPU on it that's, you know, maybe good for, at that particular firewall, like ours in our office, it's maybe good for half a dozen good VPN sessions. Plus, they're trying to run the video meetings from the desktop in the VPN. So I'm VPNing, then launching Zoom on that RDP desktop, and then trying to hold my meeting from that. It's like, it's craziness. So VPN and RDP are our most common tool, which is really surprising here. And video, because of that, has become inconsistent because a lot of people are trying to ban video because the bandwidth, especially if you're using VPN and trying to run your desktop meeting from that, it's really going to suck the bandwidth, and then bandwidth suffers, and then the message suffers. So they say you have to shut down your video. I saw that consistently in areas we talked to, that we have to turn off video to conserve bandwidth. Very surprising there. But for the techies in a crowd here who've been working in the cloud, it's just like going from home. It's like I just connect to the cloud from my desktop, like for my local thing. I don't go VPNing into work for any particular reason, unless there's a server I want to go. But a lot of that we've migrated to the cloud, right? So very surprising. So this is something we'll have to work with our business partners, because they're often just VPNing in rather than running it locally on their own machine. I have no idea what insight I'm up into now. So my next insight is welcome to my world. I think, yeah, this is probably my fifth or sixth one here, probably my fifth one. The fifth insight here is welcome to my world. What's the insight bot saying about this one is that those people who have been working from home for some time, or remote staff even, are just thrilled. They're just excited beyond belief. And the reason they're excited is because now you're stuck in my world, right? Welcome to my world. And one of the things they recognize in welcome to my world is that, hey, I want to be able to have these conversations with you. I want to be able to have this dialogue. I want you to remember that I even exist. Because as people are working remotely, one of the things we're hearing over and over again is, oh, they finally understand what it's like to be on the other end of the camera. They finally understand what it's like not to be sitting and be able to have those quick conversations before the meeting because everyone's there can hear you, right? They finally get it. And so they think this is really, really good stuff. And they're really excited that it's like finally understand, and they'll be able to embrace it and use this more. And one of the things they're most excited about is that they can actually hear everything now. The whole idea of that conference room with the speakerphone and maybe something up on the screen just didn't work for most of the work from home and remote staff, because they would hear every fifth word and it was muted, and it was really tough because people weren't interacting and they were talking over each other, because it would work in the room, but it wouldn't work over the speakerphone. But now that we've gone work from home, everybody's able to hear this kind of stuff, and it's really super exciting. So they love that part of it. And what they're afraid of, though, and they keep mentioning this over and over again in our conversations, they're really afraid that when we start going back to work, that we'll go back to the sort of old way, that everyone will go back to the office, They'll go back to the conference room and they'll think, oh yeah, well, at least I remember you now, but I'll bring out the cheap speakerphone that we have. And then we'll get a lot of people in the room having a conversation and I'm stuck back remote again. So they hope they all remember this experience well enough when they go back to the office. What I think they don't realize though is that going back to the office is going to be kind of weird for a while. If you think about the social distancing problems that we still want to be able to have, that is physically distancing ourselves by at least 6 feet. What does that imply about our office layouts currently? How can we stay at a safe distance as we transition through the another 8-9 months it's going to take to get a vaccine or herd immunity in place so that we can go back to work but still remain somewhat independent, right? So I think maybe their fears are a little overblown here. Perhaps this will work itself out. My sixth insight here is thinking time. And this goes right along the head with my introverts here quite a bit. Because what the Insight bot was saying is that they love getting away from the office space. This was a repeated mantra. It's like, oh, finally, I got rid of the open office space, right? Where they shove this all in the bullpen. The office space appears to be, as we look at the literature and studies that recently come out, one of the most horrible experiments we've tried in working situations for quite some time, right? It was a big plus idea from the Agile community at the beginning, thinking, wow, let's get those collaborative sessions going, let's get those communication flowing, and that's all positive things, but shoving everyone into one room and saying do it all the time turned out to be the wrong answer. It says those collaborative times, just like everything else, need to be intentional. And for the most part, the open office started to become the deserted office. I can tell you how many times I traveled to shops and I said, hey, show me where your devs are working. And they would take me down the dev floor, which was an open office concept. And it was mostly empty. And I'd say, wow, you have a lot of open recs, huh? And they go, oh, no, we're full. We're fully staffed. But most people are working from home or working from someplace else because it's too noisy in here. And so this work from home has finally given the rest of the group that didn't have that permission finally to get away from the open office space, and they're just loving the thinking time. And again, this is something that's going to have to be interesting when we go back to the office, because if we want to maintain some physical separation, that 6 feet rule that we keep hearing about, how are we going to do that in the open office space? Are we going to have at least half of us working from home on a regular basis just so we can have intermittent seats? And how does it deal with that hoteling concept a lot of people have, where we don't even have a seat, but you just have check out. Who sat there before? Did they cough on anything? Who last cleaned this thing, right? A lot of businesses are having to think about this. One of the things, though, that people are thinking, and then we hear this overall, is that this increased thinking time is actually increasing my productivity. And generally what the survey data was looking at when I got a glance at it, says productivity, people believe, is the same or even higher than it was before. Now, this is a very interesting idea, and I'm not sure this is a short-term or long-term thing. If we had a bunch of short-term things we need to get done, I can certainly see working from home boosting that productivity. We're new at it, we're excited, we're challenged by it, and we're going forward. But when we have to go back to do some collaborative work, I wonder how that's going to hit that productivity. But really, for the thinking part, this seems to be a really positive thing. The thinking time is way up there. And because they're not driving the commute. In fact, one of the things, if you had to say the biggest work from home thing that was said multiple times is, I finally got out of my commute. And it was amazing the commute times we were hearing. My commute personally is about 20 minutes. I think that's too long, but that's me. Where we are hearing commutes of an hour and a half, 2 hours, an hour on a regular basis. And so all that spare time, people are actually putting more extra hours in. And this also might be a quarantine kind of thing. Because of the quarantine, I really just can't go out and visit my friends. And so I might as well work. And if the work is engaging, the work is moving the company forward. And a lot of companies right now appear to be in survival mode, right? If you're in the mask business or the Purell or the toilet paper business, you're like, wow, our business is maybe even suffering here and we're just trying to survive. And so we're seeing a lot of extra hours put in. And I think it's a combination of we can spend time thinking so I can actually get stuff done. I can see myself making progress. I'm not being interrupted. I don't have anything else better to do, and I've saved time on my commute. So those are really 3 sort of interesting takeaways we're seeing, or insights from this thinking time. And my last insight here, you are who you are. And this one was a particularly sort of fascinating one, because what the RUR says a couple of things. One is that if we looked at the big picture here and we looked across multiple comments in our survey and our conversations with various clients, we're hearing that communication is improving or getting tougher or staying the same. And so what's really going on here? And it turns out this is all true. It depends on what you're trying to communicate. I mean, I've already talked about a little bit about this idea that we become a little bit more formal in our communications on these mediums because our voices are all at the same level. We can't overpower one. If two people talk at the same time, our brains really can't modulate because it's only coming out of one speaker. We can't do the focal thing we can with human beings where we can sort of tune one out and focus on one because it's all coming in from the same sort of space in our heads, our headset at least. And so we've got to take more formal. So in that sense, our practices are improving, but it also makes it tougher. We don't have that free flowingness. It's staying the same, that we still hearing from the same people, hearing the same kind of ideas, and that's going on pretty well. But what I think it's really saying here is that you are who you are. That is, if you were good at communicating before, you're probably even improving here because the little bit extra formality, a little extra structure to it, allows you to excel at what you were already good at. If you were used to people yelling to get their way, to drive things forward, then you're like, wow, things are kind of tougher. They're falling apart. They're just, kind of getting even harder to do because we can't tune things out. And if they're staying the same, you're probably in the medium. So this idea of your issues are probably just going to be in your face more, which is a huge opportunity if you think about it, right? Because if we were having communication issues before and our work from home causes to be magnified, then this is our opportunity to say we can actually fix it because it's so in our face, we have to do something about it. As opposed to saying, we can keep managed. That's just the way so-and-so is. So any issues you have right now are being magnified. The other thing that the Insight bot is saying is that this is a good chance overall. And a lot of people were thinking this is an opportunity for us as a group, as an organization, to really sharpen what we're doing here. Because as the old saying goes, it's not what you say, it's what they hear, right? This is true in email and written documentation and communication. It doesn't matter what I physically say. It really matters what message are you getting out of what I'm saying, which includes not just the words, but the tone, the forcefulness, the timing of it, all that stuff leads to that conversation. And so this gives us a chance because our medium sort of says, let's dampen a few of those things. So you have to be more intentional about it, more thought-provoking. This is like putting the smiley faces on the end of a chat message. We do that because we don't have the tone, we don't have the timing things that tells you, hey, this is a joke, the inflections that make that happen. Now we're seeing that in our verbal communication, where we could get rid of that a little bit, and we have to still sharpen it a little bit and say, here's our policies and tools to make sure that we can get the most richest conversations, because it really matters what you hear, not just what I say. The other thing that's happening here, which is I find a little disappointing though, and I think it really harkens back to that thinking time quite a bit here, is that I'm seeing a switch from teamwork back to individual work. Because when I'm working from home, I am by definition isolated to a certain degree. Yes, I've got my Slack channels up and I've got my status bubbles and teams and all this kind of stuff. But generally, I'm individualistic and I'm isolated. And so I get a piece of work and I work it back myself. And this is, I think, having our biggest impact on our agile teams. One of the things that agile teams have always struggled with is actually being a team. What they tend to be, almost every time I go visit their shop, is they're a bunch of individuals who happen to report to the same daily stand-up about their individual work. They're not acting as a team at all. They're acting as a set of parallel individuals who happen to be working on the same increment. Surprise. And going for work from home has really sort of emphasized that again, that you are an individual working on your own. And so I'm hearing a lot of people saying, well, we went from daily stand-ups to twice a week stand-ups because, they could just put up in Slack what they've been doing, and we can have Slack stand-ups rather than verbal stand-ups, because that sense of team, how do we act together as a team? Because we don't have the free-flowing communication, because we don't have the whiteboards, because we don't have the infrastructure to allow teams to work really well together, we see that switch back to individual work. So if you had that predisposition before to be an individual, then you are going to really slide back to individual work. If you had that, if you were really trying to be a team, it's the struggle here. That's where we see the communication being a little bit tougher for those groups than those groups that said, oh yeah, it's getting better because we could be an individual again. All right, so those were my 7 insights. And so here you see my insights. And just a moment of this 5.2, just as a silly aside, up until about 15 minutes before this talk, I had given a different name to this talk. I called it At Least 5 Insights because when I was writing it, I didn't know how many insights I was going to have. And so they needed a name. I gave the name At Least 5 Insights. And so I didn't fix this slide before we started to call it just 7 insights. So pretend it said 7 insights, not the 5 insights, at least 5 plus 2 more. And these are the 7 insights. One is that this is only a test. And the idea here again is that this is a interesting test because we're forced to do it. Everyone's forced and we're on the same page. So we're giving a lot of people slack. And people's expectations were pretty low and we're exceeding those really low expectations. They're finding it. They're saying basically, it's not that bad. It's actually working pretty well. And something is actually working a little bit better than we even thought it would. Maybe even better than in person for some things. And so this is only a test though. We're going to go back to working in the office to some degree, but the new mix is kind of open because people do need people. And we actually need access to some of our tools and test equipment that really doesn't go home very well. I'm working with a large medical device company. And for example, their medical device, you're not gonna put that in someone's home. You have to go to a lab to actually run stuff on it. But the only thing that we're seeing is that coders, developers, tend to like the work from home still. And so we might see a lot more of that work from home from coders than we do from business people or system testers or something like that. But we've got to find a way to do collaborative work. That's still a bugaboo here. We really like our stickies, right? We need to find a way to make that happen. Because our old tech, the whiteboards and those collaborative meeting rooms, the big room meetings, yeah, that's the tech we want to try to bring in the future. And we're not sure yet how to use the new tech yet, how to make that actually happen. But for those people who have been doing this for a long time, they're finally saying, yes, you finally get it. You're finally learning the limitations of technology. So hopefully then when we do go back to the office, that we can really make it happen. But at the same time, we need to preserve this thinking time. Those big rooms, which are not going to be viable to us for some time if we're going to follow these social, physical distancing rules, are not going to be available. And so we can actually bring back this idea of thinking time, where we're not going to let people be interrupted. We're going to give them blocks and chunks of time to think and think through hard problems and to engage others only as necessary. But remember, as you are, you're bringing that to this new medium. And in this new medium, you're going to actually amplify whatever you were before. If you were good, you'll get better. If not, you'll do worse. So those are the insights that we're seeing so far. We're actually going to put together here at Construx a much larger report with lots of data and bubbles and charts and stuff like that, with all the insights we're seeing from our surveys and data. But I wanted to give you these 7 sort of quick insights so you get a feeling for what it's like. And hopefully this resonates with you with what you're seeing with work from home. And if not, drop me a chat bubble here, of course, or a question thing here that says, hey, well, this is what we're seeing going forward. And I have a couple moderators online here that will start taking those here in a second. But I just want to wrap this up saying we're still learning here. We're still taking advantage of this situation. And this is going to dynamically change. I always love pundits who say, well, now that we're all working from home, we'll never go back to the office and office space will dry up. And it's like, no, people always think the grass is greener on the other side. People from work from home will start saying, yeah, I love that, but gosh, I would love to be able to go back to have a meeting here and so on and so forth. So we'll still see it and we'll stop traveling for a while, but after a while people say, well, you know, it's important that we have some face-to-face time. We'll have gurus saying, we're missing face-to-face time and we'll start traveling all over the place again. All right, so this is a transition. We're gonna find a new medium here. Let's see how we can do that. And with that, I'm open up for questions. Eric and Jesse are aboard with me on the background. And Eric will usually unmute and see if anything has come through the question boards. I haven't brought up Eric, so if you've got something off the queue, that would be really handy.
Okay, yeah, we have a couple of stories and a couple of questions. What would you like first?
Yeah, good. Let's hear a couple, share first.
Okay, the share, let me scroll up. Where did it go?
Okay, I blew you on the share thing, huh?
There it is. My office is quiet. I have few pointless meetings and very low stress. At home, I have a 5-year-old kid. My wife also works from home and pushes 90% of childcare to me. It's awful.
Yeah. So this is why this is only a test, right? Because we're really not working from home. We're forced at home. And unfortunately, in some situations, the force fit doesn't fit nearly as well as some other force fits. I know, Eric, that you've been working from home for years, right?
Right.
And you have a space that you've set up that works really well for you. People know, and except for your cat, it works pretty well.
Yeah, we have the deaf cat who has lost her indoor voice.
Yeah. Yeah, so
that
if you hear
actually
a cat in the
bleeds.
background, that's just the
That
situation.
bleeds right into a question that was just asked, and I have a start of a private reply to from Anonymous. It seems that for Gen Y and Gen Z, technology is the preferred medium for community, collaboration, and communication. Given that we may be in a semi-quarantine mandate for 1 to 2 years, what do you think? Gen X and previous generations may be forced to embrace this medium as more than a short-term thing to endure.
Yeah, in fact, I listened into a meeting with a bunch of CIOs and pundits this morning, and they were all in their upper 50s and low 60s kind of thing, and they're like, "Wow." One woman said, "We're forced to use this technology that my grandchildren are using."
Yeah.
And it actually works.
Yeah, and I think the discomfort is situational because, as most of our listeners may not know, before Construx, I spent 17 and a half years with Intel. And that's a long time. And that was a long time ago when I started. But since the beginning of that, turn of the century, that company, by necessity, with 250 locations worldwide and lacking the sense to co-locate teams, we always had remote work going on.
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of organizations today, it's already happening. Right?
Yeah.
And,
So
but
I'm in the
it was
old.
happening among the technical staff more than the leadership, though. That's I
Exactly.
think, the interesting bit.
But I'm an old curmudgeon, so I'm certainly I'm a baby boomer, and I'm perfectly comfortable working in this environment. So old dogs can learn new tricks, and I think as people get better at this, some folks in previous generations are going to struggle. Others are going to find it's okay.
Right. Well, we're adaptable species and we'll learn. I think those old folks will learn. But what's really fascinating is that a lot of the technology, I mean, here's where an Intel or a Medtronic or Johnson, any of these large, Boeing, any large organization, all the techies and all the frontline independent contributors have learned to work remotely and live with it because they had to. Their teams are spread all over heck and gone.
Right, and you and I talked about the sort of unanticipated benefit of distance being that you no longer take for granted the proximity of a conference room or a water cooler conversation or sticking your head inside
You have to
someone's
become much
cubicle.
more intentional, yeah.
Yeah, and when as you rightly said at the beginning, it's not what you say, it's what they hear. And in a remote situation, people are often taking a lot more care in crafting the message so it can be comprehended. And it ends up just being better than what you might have delivered in that face-to-face situation.
Yeah, yeah, and hopefully we're seeing this now actually coming to the leadership of organizations. This is where the technology, I think, is the hardest connection for the Gen X. It's not at the individual contributor level, but it's at the upper manager level who's not used to using this technology because they were the ones jet setting around and people would come to them, not they go to people.
Yeah, and maybe the frequency of these interactions is lower, so you don't have the kind of meticulous closed loop feedback that some leaders are comfortable with. You have much more open loop feedback, like you would coach an actor and say, when you give that soliloquy, can you be a little more this way or that way? And then you just leave them to do it rather than turning a meter on to see if they did.
Yeah, the other technology piece here is that I think in people my age, and maybe a little bit older, is we're not used to being on camera or video as nearly as much, and don't like the looks of ourselves staring back at ourselves in those little pictures.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know if that's my children don't seem to be care if they're in a video or not. But I mean, me, it's like I kind of want to duck out of a camera shot. My wife wants to duck out of a camera shot. It's like, why are you taking a picture of me? It's like, why not?
I'm certain that cameras steal your soul. I know that.
Yeah.
All right,
So
a couple
that
of
might be the bigger issue is not the technology, but just the camera stealing our souls.
That's it. Now, several other good questions here. Any thoughts on how safe Zoom and similar products are? Rumors have it that Zoom was using servers in China. So is there any data around this, and are other tools in your experience? Because I know you do a lot of our tool backbone, so I want to defer to you.
Yeah. No, Zoom, first of all, Zoom is fixing most of its issues. Let's just be clear about it. They've done a really good job of responding, going, yeah, we were a cheap, throw it up, use kits, use open source as quickly as we can to get something up kind of organization. And they seem to have put the brakes on that and really up their security game. I just saw an announcement that they're going to encrypt at AES 256 encryption, all communication going forward rather than just some communication.
That's good.
So they're doing a good job coming up speed. But if you really are counting on, really high end, there's no one yet that's really developed a high security solution yet. As far as the tools best, I've been reading about this for a while. There's a couple, startups that are saying we actually have encrypted data stuff at rest. We have encrypted transport. We have encrypted this. But one of the people forget is two things. One, even with encryption, we're still going over a public internet, right? And once you go over a public internet, that does open you up to someone grabbing the encrypted traffic and trying to break the encryption. It's hard, but big machines can do it and large governments have it. But the weakest point is the home setup, right? And so what is my firewall? What is my router doing? What's going on with that?
Yeah.
And so I think the safety of a Teams, a Zoom, that kind of is immaterial to the safety of the home router, the home desktop, the ISP that you're using that finally gets it out to a routed network. To me, that's much bigger holes than you'll see in the Zoom. So I haven't worried about the Zoom thing.
Well, certainly people should be looking at VPNs for that last mile, right? So Zoom over VPN is going to be a lot better than Zoom to your ISP without any cover.
Right, and that's why VPN is becoming such a big deal here. And people are trying to VPN the office, saying, well, I know the office equipment has been vetted, it's safe. So if I VPN there, I'm not really anything besides this desktop display unit and I'm remote mouse click, but that's suffering the bandwidth issues that can't now kills off the video because everything can't travel to that VPN gateway.
Yeah. All right, Michelle
Don't
asks,
worry about Zoom anymore. It's good enough for 99% of the work unless you're doing top secret stuff for the government, then worry about it.
well, and that takes me back again to Intel days when the large IT organization there had a very rigorous vetting process for this kind of thing with Cisco and Microsoft Teams and Slack and everything else that people wanted to bring into the environment. And they would come up with a ranking that said, you can share this level of information over that tool. And that was it. So, you could not share restricted secret information over various tools, but you could share merely confidential information over these tools.
Yeah, so this is maybe sharpening the policy thing that we saw going on to help pick the right tool. And one of the things I talk about in another session was that don't have too many tools.
Yeah.
Try to get good on a few tools and not have a bazillion tools.
Right, for sure. All right, there's two other questions here that we can address. They're sort of in the same vein, so let me sort of combine them. And this regarding real estate and finance. Have you seen any comments regarding companies saving money on real estate or office overhead costs to where they may consider reducing the office footprint going forward and shifting to a larger percentage of work from home? Conversely, have many workers reported increased expense in home utilities and overhead or needing to incur expenses to create new office spaces for home or dual working spouses, sorry.
Yeah. So the idea of, first of all, the office space thing. I have heard from several companies that they are putting on hold their expansion ideas for the moment. Obviously, one, because there's no one to put in that place, but also two, because it's like, wow, this is working out better than we expected. Do we actually need to buy that new footprint?
Right.
For those people that have the footprint today, one of the challenges I've heard recently quite clearly is, how are we going to use that footprint that we do have? Because what we're hearing is that if we're going to be in this transmissional stage for a year or so, don't get to that herd or vaccine state, right? Is that we can't have people working closely together. So what does that mean for our workspaces, our bathrooms, our cafeterias? Right? How do we feed people who come into the office, our restaurants? We can't handle the volume that we used to handle. And so there's always going to be some people working from home. And so not only is it impacting their input about new leases or future leases, but it's also impacting how do we use the leases that we're already stuck with? And so if we're going to deal with that, then there might not be any cost savings for the business because I have to actually make more space per person than I currently have. And so I actually may have to lease more space if I want to have them on a site within safe, protect my IP or whatever. Mm-hmm. For the reimbursement from home, I'm hearing nothing about that. I'm not here. I don't know if Eric, you've heard anything, but I haven't heard anything about people being reimbursed for. I mean, Basic Kit will give you a laptop to take home and maybe a webcam. But if you have to set up a space like clean your room, paint your walls, make them look better, what I'm hearing more is how do we get Teams, Zoom, and particularly Google Hangouts to do a virtual background?
Yeah. Now I think companies are going to make policy for this because I've worked at different firms, again, like Intel, where if you wanted a home office, that was fine, but you had to meet the equipment standards for the company around ergonomics, for example, because they didn't want to have people increasing wrist injuries or other eye issues and things just because you had a substandard environment at home. So there were policies and rules and reimbursement to get to that level. But as you say, they wouldn't pay to create a space and put in new countertops or do other things like that.
Right. I think what I hear you saying, Eric, is that if they were going to buy it for the office, they buy it for your home office just the same.
Right. Exactly.
But they're not going to make it so you have a home office.
And they're not going to give you a pass on that and allow you to just get whatever the heck you want at home. You have to meet the corporate standard. It's not quite a company facility in your office, but it's close.
Right.
So, and also, what happens to the commercial real estate market when CFOs realize they may not need to pay rent for big pricey buildings in the future?
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that, because it's one thing I think is that there's a lot of people are going to say, you know what, I'd rather go back to the office. There is advantages to being in the office that work from home doesn't have, like to be able to do that free flow collaborative stuff. We haven't figured that out yet, but also that we're going to need more office for fewer people, right? For at least a year or so. So I'm not seeing a huge impact. I mean, expansion plans, but they're not going to like give up leases right and left, I don't think.
It's really interesting that this happened now, because there's been an ongoing debate around having office spaces and dedicated workspaces versus the facilities managers who get paid to maximize bodies per square feet and hold down costs in real estate, looking at it and saying, well, you know, I know by checking the parking lot and attendance logs with badge scanning that 25% of you work at home on any given day. So I'm going to reduce the size of my facility and I'm going to take away your dedicated space, which is empty, and I'm going to start using that more wisely for them. And as you say, this is now going to push the other direction, where dedicated space or not, we need less dense spaces to maintain social distancing when necessary.
Right.
So now the experiment with docked workstations and that I don't think worked very well. The criticism of that was just ferocious. And you could walk into a sterile space where nobody has pictures on their walls or no walls at all, and you had visual and auditory distraction, and everybody hides in headphones. Well, that was not working anyway. So maybe this is just a disruption we need to knock that off and get back to something productive.
Yeah, I think two things. One is it's always a few places that I did that was really trying the hoteling. They always kept telling me that everyone sat in the same place every day anyhow.
Right.
And the second thing, the only thing that happened is someone came in that was from visiting and sat in the wrong spot. Then it started a domino effect.
Right.
The other thing there is that, you know, this idea of the bullpen, right? We're going to shove 14 developers into a conference room and they're going to code like mad. It's good for a short burst, but this is one that I think that's had to be knocked off for some time. People just, it didn't have legs to go the long distance. It could do short bursts of a time, but long time, everyone seemed to dislike it.
Yeah, for sure. Last one I see is related to the home networking comment. We've triggered something in anonymous. Thanks. How do we make our home networks, and I assume better, more secure, etc.? A little short there on the question mark.
Yeah. So the simplest thing to do is to make sure you have a decent. So I'm assuming that you have from either a DSL line, a cable modem, or a FiOS modem for the Xfinity or Comcast, or which is Xfinity or Verizon FiOS or Frontier or whatever it is in your network. That's what's my network. So you have one of three inputs typically, right? So it's cable, it's fiber, or it's DSL. And if you're a techie, it's going to be cable or fiber because DSL is too freaking slow. If you have those, the first thing I think one of the more important is to ditch the vendor supplied router. Right? If it's Xfinity where it says, I'm doing your routing and your Wi-Fi for you, so you have Xfinity Wi-Fi and all that, yeah, get rid of that. Put it in bridge mode and get your own router, which you can maintain the firmware on, that you can make sure it has an updatable firmware that is maintained by the vendor, because that's usually the main hacking point is the router. Now, if you're not willing to do that, the Xfinity, you can get by with it, but it's better to get your own. The gold standard these days is to get something from like Ubiquiti, the Unified Gateway products, or their secure gateways, or the home version of the physical firewall of some kind. What was that? What was the one we have? Fortinet, the physical version. And there's a couple others. Zephyr has one, I think. That would say, okay, I'm gonna make my own This is for, I'm assuming most of you guys out there are developer techies. So you get your own firewall, make your own firewall policies. For example, I have a Unify gateway in my closet here, and I have a VLAN for my home computer, and I have a separate VLAN for my Internet of Things, so it can't attack my internet. So they can't even see each other, right? Yeah. So my thermostats and my other things and my Apple TV cannot see my home network.
Yeah.
That's gotta be the goal setting, right? When you start setting up VLANs in your home. But the simplest thing you can do is make sure your router has up-to-date firmware.
Yeah, for sure. And change the default password, for goodness sake.
Change the default password.
Strong password.
Right. And if you can get rid of that Xfinity box or whatever that thing that came from your cable modem copy that you're having to pay rent for anyhow.
And some of the routers allow you to change the administrator account name so it's not admin anymore, and that can be wise too. And the other thing I found is
use the guest network. Most of the newest routers have guest networks, and put your Internet of Things on the guest network.
Sure. And you can also go in and use some quality of service configuration in most modern routers, most recent routers, where this is helpful if you have spouses or kids who are also working from home and you want the lion's share of bandwidth for your video conference, not some YouTube stream or whatever else is going on, gameplay.
Yeah, I would put my children on a different VLAN and give them a budget.
You can do that, or you could just go into the QoS section and take your IP address for your laptop and say, this gets first crack at everything.
Right. Now, to be honest with you, Eric, I mean, for your one at home, if you're over, say, most people have at least 40 to 50 down. So we're worried about the upstream. If you're at 5 upstream, then QoS is something important for you, because an upstream video bandwidth will be 5 or 6 megabytes per second.
Right.
And so if you only got 5 up, then a QoS is definitely important. If you've got a symmetrical or something like 20 or 25 or better up, then the QoS is not going to buy you much, because you got plenty of bandwidth for 5 people streaming upstream.
Yeah, and I turned mine off when I went symmetric. I'm 75, and life is good.
Yeah, yeah. So it's after about 20 or 30 up and down, it's like, yeah, QoS.
So there's a follow-up from Anonymous about how do you give advice to non-techs about their home network, because we just used a bunch of crazy acronyms and things that the average person just looks at.
Oh, okay. So YouTube is a great place to set up a home network, but the simplest, so is the box, how do we talk to a non-techie? Get a techie friend.
I think it helps to know the mental models. When my mother, who was definitely non-techie, when she was alive and elderly and had internet coming into her home, her mental model of this was like the water or the electricity. So she would call me and say, the internet is broken. And I would come over to fix the internet, and sort of smirking to myself, the internet's fine. Let's check your firewall and your gateway and maybe a few other things that might have gone wrong in between. So the average person doesn't have the kind of conceptual model of the internet that we have. And I think you have to address them where they live.
Yeah, so but I'm a little serious about YouTube. There's a series out there called Networking Basics, I think, in YouTube, that does explain in very simple terms general networking concepts. It's like, what is a firewall? There's a what is a firewall? What is a gateway? What is a rule? What is all this stuff? But if you're just a simple person, get a reasonably good Netgear Wi-Fi access point. Netgear does a pretty good job of updating, so just go to Netgear and get one of those. Get a Unify, even better, get a Unify Dream Machine. They're $300, Unify Dream Machine. It has a great Wi-Fi on top. It has a switch in it. It has all sorts of geeky things. And even if you set up out of the box, it's pretty damn secure. And it's updating itself regularly on protective stuff.
Mm-hmm. All right, I am not seeing any new questions, so I think you can call it a day.
All right, well, thank everyone for coming. Thank you for sharing your stories and your questions. You can contact any one of us here at Construx, at myself at earl.beede@construx.com. And again, you can pause this right here so you can see what that is, or hello@construx.com. We'd be happy to hear from you and talk about setting up your network, even if you want to have a chat on the side, because I've learned a lot over the years. Just drop us a line, and we'll hopefully see you at the next Lunch and Learn. Bye, all.